All right, so I am with Florida Inclusion Network. So what is inclusion? Inclusion is where the goal is to make sure that students with disabilities are being included and educated in a general education setting alongside their non-disabled peers. And that is our goal. I work for uh, Region 1 throughout. FIN is stretched out throughout Florida, and we have 27 FIN facilitators across the entire state, and we are divided up into 5 regions. And right here, you are looking at Region 1, and in Region 1, we have 3 different fiddlers management systems with Emerald Coast, PAC, and Miccosukee that provide support to Region 1. This slide you will notice, so here are the districts that we service right here in Miccosukee: FAMU Lab School, FSU Lab School, Gadsden, Jefferson, Leon, Taylor, and Wakulla. You will not meet my partner today, Kelly Steinmetz, but here is Kelly's contact information, and here is my contact information. If you'd be interested in contacting us for any future support or products that you will be introduced to throughout the presentation. And so our mission, which I briefly just explained, the Florida Inclusion Network collaborates with districts and schools and other discretionary projects to provide a customized service and supports, ensuring all students with disabilities have the same educational, social, and future opportunities as their peers. And you notice a few bullets. In partnership with districts, FIN, we facilitate implementation of best practices for inclusive education. And the bullets represent the directive we take to help us support that goal. Here are the supports we provide to families. In our virtual booth, you should also have access to several family fact folios we offer. We do have, you will not see all the languages there, but we do have those in multiple languages. We have those in English, we have those in Spanish, and we have those in Haitian Creole. And if you would like access to those in a different language, I would encourage you to, I didn't list them all on the virtual booth because there were so many, but if you were to reach out, we would be happy to provide those to you. So what you're looking at, these are the areas where FIN can provide support for families. This support can come in many forms, like a parent workshop on an inclusive topic, a face-to-face conversation, a phone call. We do collaborate with several of our districts' parent organizations and parent night to provide trainings and overviews on different types of support that that we offer and that parents are interested in. So here are the family fact folios I mentioned that are available in our virtual booth. And you will see we have some tips for virtual learning. We have Family Fact Folio Volume 1, what does it mean to be inclusive? Volume 2, what does it mean to be an advocate for your child? Volume 3, what does it mean to have an inclusive classroom? Volume 4, what's it mean to have an inclusive school? We have a fact folio on communication tips. We have back to school tips. And we also have a fact folio not listed on here on how to tips for making friends. So the Florida Inclusion Network. So what do we actually do? Our service falls under 4 main areas or 4 pillars that we call our framework. And these pillars are district capacity building, family support and resources, school-based planning, implementation, and support, and resource, and products. We assist schools and families with training on multiple topics, including collaboration between the general education teacher, the ESE teacher, creating an inclusive master schedule to support students with disabilities, and supporting a Peers as Partners in Learning program. And if you're not familiar with our Peers as Partners in Learning program, it is a curriculum that was designed by Finn in collaboration with some other discretionary projects in schools here in Florida. What's nice about the PPL program is that it is a Florida-born program, and it's a curriculum where we teach non-disabled peers. It's an elective course they can take, and it's for secondary, so it's for middle school and high school. And non-disabled peers enroll in the course, and then part of the course is they push into general education classrooms and support students with disabilities. So we're not replacing the specially designed instruction our students with disabilities will need in the gen ed classroom, but it's basically a support service type model where, they're just, sometimes they're redirection, sometimes they're just having conversations on how they understand how to solve a problem, or ways that they learn best. But it's a wonderful program. It benefits students with disabilities and without disabilities. It benefits the teacher, and it's just a great way to create that inclusive community and to help build long-lasting friendships. And so what is inclusion? So you'll notice this slide kind of highlights a couple keys on what inclusion does. And you just see some words like invite, everyone has something to offer, make it a better place. So inclusion is the practice of educating all students together. So students with disabilities and students without disabilities. And we believe this is the most effective way to educate students because, our overall goal is to prepare our students, all of our students, to assimilate into society and become productive, be able to become productive members of society. And an inclusive environment is the most effective way to do that. If we're starting this practice in school, or if the schools are being responsible for preparing our students to assimilate into society, what's a better way to do that than for them to receive their education and have the educational experience in an inclusive environment alongside their non-disabled peers. Miss Mary, you may want to, I believe your mic's hot, Miss Mary, and I can kind of hear you on the back end.
Okay, sorry.
All right, not a problem. So here's what inclusion is. I'd like to remind everyone, first of all, it is every student's civil right to first be considered a gen ed student. It's all students learning together. It's an atmosphere that promotes a sense of belonging, equality, acceptance. It focuses on collaboration, integrated services. It supports adaptations and modifications within the general education curriculum. And it's highly effective, research-based instruction and assessments. And I would like to also note that it does not only benefit students with disabilities. All students benefit from a learning environment that creates multiple avenues for students to be successful, which is one of the key terms in inclusion. When we think of inclusion, we want to think of an environment that's not just educating or delivering education and providing opportunities for in one fashion to a small group of students. We want to think about education in the form of instruction, the way we're engaging students in the content, the way we're assessing students in the content, that those key skills or those key principles are being delivered in the classroom in multiple ways. So we're reaching a diverse group of students. And that's a key to an inclusive That's the key to the success of an inclusive classroom. And I'll elaborate on that a little more as we work our way through the presentation. So what inclusion is not, it's not educators working in isolation. So, we're not back in the caveman days where students with disabilities are being educated in a classroom all by them, all by themselves, or they're being educated in the portable building behind the school, and the ESE teacher is only working with those ESE kids, and they say, these are your kids, these are my kids. That is not inclusion. Inclusion is where we have a learning community that is existing and learning together. It's not grouping students by ability. It's not scheduling students into the general education classroom without supports for students and teachers. It's not watering down the curriculum. It's not expecting all students to do the same thing at the same time in the same way, which I kind of noted on that when we're looking at an inclusive classroom, on how we're creating a classroom that is creating opportunities for a diverse group of learners to have success in that classroom together. So who benefits from inclusion? Everyone benefits from inclusion. Students with disabilities will benefit, students without disabilities will benefit, and educators will benefit. When we're looking at students with disabilities, we have improved social and communication skills. We see improved academic, we see improved behavior, and we just see overall self-esteem and self-confidence start to develop. Students without disabilities, they engage in academic tasks at a higher and deeper level of understanding. They benefit from strategies used to support students with disabilities, increased awareness and sensitivity to human needs, differences, diversity, and social justice. Our educators benefit from more skilled in teaching all students. They learn to share responsibilities for educating all students, and they also develop a more satisfying professional relationship. And one of the biggest benefits of inclusion is that we're encouraging our teachers, our gen ed teachers, and our ESE teachers to engage in collaboration about creating an environment where all students can be successful. So we're sharing strategies, we're sharing ideas, we're brainstorming. I like to associate it with, two brains are better than one. Here's a brief history of how far we have came in inclusion, and I just want to note, I got some notes right here. I didn't want to make sure I missed. So in 1975, the Education for Handicapped Children Act was passed, providing a free, appropriate public education for individualized education plans. So that's our IEPs, due process hearing, and education in the least restrictive environment. So that was in 1975. In 2007, the final regulation for No Child Left Behind was published, emphasizing inclusion for students K through 12, educational performance, and accountability system created in Florida to align with the IDEA, first best practices for inclusive education. And then in 2015, we had Essa, which is the Federal Every Student Succeed Act, which was signed and established challenging academic standards in reading, math, and science for all students with supports, starting in the general education setting and focused on closing achievement gaps, thus assuring access to a quality public education resulting in college or career-ready skills. So this is what drives our work. And I just want to emphasize that in 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed, which was ensuring all students have access and the right to a free and appropriate public education. And then in 2015, we kind of elaborated on that a little bit. And not saying that it's there's more involved than only including students with disabilities in the general education setting. So now that we're including them, now we got to focus on how do we create an environment within the general education they can be successful in. So what you're looking at is kind of the evolution of inclusion over the last 50 years. And we started out with exclusion, which occurred when students were directly or indirectly prevented or denied access in education. And then we moved into segregation. So the idea was that students with disabilities should be educated, but you can see how the model kind of reflects, but they shouldn't be educated with the other students. And then as we evolved, we moved into integration. So this is when our students with disabilities started moving from the portable buildings behind the school into the classroom. But you notice that they're still receiving, even though they're in the classroom, they're still not really part of the classroom, and they were not receiving the same instruction that the other students were receiving. And so you notice the model of inclusion is where now we have, you really can't tell the difference between our students with disabilities and our students without disabilities. Inclusion involves the process of a systematic reform, embodying change and modifications in contents and teaching methods that allow all students to have success in the gen ed classroom. The importance of collaboration. Inclusion requires a lot of collaboration between the general education teacher and the special education teacher, paraprofessionals, related services, and families. In order for inclusion to be successful, it's important that teachers must work together and share responsibilities for ongoing assessments, instruction, and achievement for all students. Effective teams regularly consult, plan, and problem solve to analyze the need of their students in an inclusive school. Family members are viewed as partners in the decision-making process. So one of the biggest benefits of inclusion is that it does encourage the whole team to routinely engage in collaboration regarding our students' education on what's working well and what's working not well. And it's a collection of the group's ideas on how to build that best individual education plan for each particular student. In this slide, you'll notice what I kind of mentioned earlier, the changes in special education law. So it's no longer an issue of access. So our students are now accessing the gen ed classroom. We're now focused on the issues of quality. So if you reflect back on that evolution we saw that kind of demonstrated inclusion, we are to the point to where our students have access to the gen ed environment. Everyone agrees that this is the best educational environment for students with disabilities. Now we're focused on the quality of that education and the type of instruction they're receiving, and how that environment can evolve to support students with disabilities and support students without disabilities. So here are some highlights from Essa. Every student succeeds at. So Essa, IDEA, Individual with Disability Education Act, said that all students with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate education. Essa kind of came in and took it to another level that said, our students with disabilities should first be considered gen education students first, which means before a student with a disability is moved to a restrictive environment that is not being educated with their non-disabled peers. We should first make sure that we do our due process and we exhaust all of our available resources we have, and that we collect data along the way to prove that the gen ed environment is not the best learning environment for a particular student before we decide to move them to a more restrictive environment. Essa highlights that all students should be taught high academic standards, that students and schools should be held accountable. It highlights the importance of appropriate accommodations, improve rates for inclusion of students with disabilities in regular assessments. And you will notice this back in 2015, we have two types of state assessments. We have in Florida, you have the FSA and you have the FSAA, which is an alternative assessment. Well, in 2015, many of our students with disabilities were no longer moved to taking the regular assessment. In kids that were available to take the FSAA were normally kids with severe, severe exceptionalities that would prevent them from being successful on the FSA, which are our access students. So now that the majority of our students with disabilities are being required to take the FSA, that is why it's so important that our students are in these gen ed classrooms and receiving that high quality of instruction from that gen ed teacher, along with receiving their specially designed instruction from their ESE teacher, which is why it's so important that our gen ed teachers and our ESE teachers engage in collaboration. So they're building these lesson plans as a team, where we make sure that all the components are built into that lesson plan and built into that learning environment to give all of our students the opportunity to experience success. And here are some highlights from IDEA. We touched on these, but how Individuals with Disabilities Act focuses on regular class with appropriate aids and services. General education first place considered by the IEP team. Removed from the regular education only when data supports. I kind of touched on that it's important that before we move a student to a more restrictive environment, that we make sure that we have exhausted all of the resources to us that we have available to help our students be successful in that general education setting. These are some highlights from Florida state statute, which was passed in 2013, which just emphasizes the importance of inclusion. And it states in Florida law that inclusion is receiving education in the general education setting, natural proportions, age-appropriate peers, and core academic classes. Some of the highlights of that, it identifies that schools, that students that are ESE students are a valued member of our school society. We're focusing on universal education. And when we say universal education, I mentioned several times that we're creating an environment where all students can be successful. That ties into that universal education. It's where we're not delivering our instruction and our lessons and our engagement strategies to just a small group of students. We're delivering all those key components of a successful lesson through multiple avenues, so we can reach as many students as possible, or so we can, make sure that we're reaching a diverse population within our class. Due to time restraints, we're gonna keep moving on. So our overall goal is to give our students the chance to access the general curriculum. All students with disabilities must have access to the general education curriculum. In Florida, this means all students must receive instruction aligned with the Florida standards and next generation sunshine state standards. Students with disabilities access to general education through the use of universal design, differentiated instruction, and individualized accommodations and supports to enhance their learning. All right, and at that time, I am wrapping up with my presentation. Right here, you will notice, please reach out and contact us via Twitter or Facebook. I'll give you a few minutes to collect this information. If you have your phone, you can also just scan those QR codes. They should work. I'll give you like 30 seconds to do that. And I'm going to get ready to toss it over to Miss Mary, and she's going to take y'all to the end of the presentation. And once again, here is my partner's email address, Kelly Steinmetz, and here is my email address, Brian Rutherford, along with our phone numbers if you would like to reach out and for more information about how we support schools, districts, and families. And if you do not have time to get that before I move on in the presentation, we can always come back to it for you.